head above the water, doing the usual.
Yeah, happy days, happy days. How's the marking going?
So lovely weather we're having outside. All right, Manoli, I'm just setting up the stream to YouTube, and then I'll hand over to you, and then
That's
we'll be
perfect.
paper
Thanks, Warren.
away.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Manoli, I see you have 10 students already. They clearly love your lecture, so you're doing a great job.
I see on my side I've got 12 participants, so that includes you and
me. It's the two of us plus our 10 students.
Oh geez, I'm being absolutely stupid today. Thanks, Warren. That makes sense.
It's fine. We'll
I
just
didn't
blame
know
it on
that
blonde
I
hair.
didn't know it included myself as a participant, but that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, Manoli, I have streamed us to YouTube. We are live. I'm stopping my screen share. So I'm going to go on mute. If you need me, just give me a shout.
Oh, thanks so much, Warwick. Appreciate the help.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, fourth years. Thank you to those 10 participants for taking the time to join us today. I would like to try in today's session a few question and answer sessions, so please participate in those. So if I ask a question, the question will be up on the slide. Please just use the Q&A feature or the chat feature and write down your answers, and we will go through some of the questions by your participation today. Okay, so I would like to start with very briefly discussing the upcoming online assessment. There has been a few emails from students regarding this, and I always direct you and your queries to the updated assessment guide. So if you look at the updated assessment guide, there are only 2 online tests. So you have written the first one, which now needs to go through the moderation process. So as soon as moderation is finished, you will receive feedback for that test. The online test 2, the date is the 11th of June. Just like with online test 1, there's only 1 attempt. And then very, very importantly, please, you must know that the study units that you need to revise are study units 3 and 4. So the prescribed readings from Fundamental is chapter 6 and 7. I need to advise you at this stage that with regards to the revision for the test, please do not just look at the content that is covered in the PowerPoints and maybe in the live lectures. Sometimes the content might not be part of the PowerPoint or the live lectures, but will still be examinable and could still be part of that online test too. So I strongly suggest to you to look at the study guide and look at the learning outcomes for both study units 3 and 4. I'm yet to decide and finalize the total as well as the time for the test. But as soon as I have done that, you will receive notification on ECI with regards to those details. After the first online test, I also received a few emails from concerned students with regards to, or their concern was that they had not saved some of their answers. So please know that the setting that I choose with regards to the online test is that as soon as the time limit is up, so if there is a 1 hour time limit, for example, your answers will automatically submit. So there's no need for you to be concerned that some of your answers were not saved and therefore will not reflect as part of the test. The other thing that I noticed from the previous test and having looked at some of the answers, where a question asks you to cite practical examples to enrich and support your discussion from your teaching practice, please understand that as part of your answer to that question, you must start a sentence with, for example, during my 2nd year of teaching practice, I witnessed this. So if, for example, we are looking at practical examples of the different levels of hierarchies theory of motivation, if you are just using examples that have been mentioned in the textbook, and have not been drawn from your own teaching practice experience, please understand that you will not receive the maximum marks for those questions. So please be very guarded that when there are questions that require you to draw from your teaching practice, you must provide relevant examples from your teaching practice and not just those that may appear in the PowerPoint as well as the textbook. Okay, so the focus for today's live lecture is Unit 4. The relevant chapter from Fundamenta is Chapter 7. And here we look at planning as one of the major tasks of a manager leader. So if you remember from last week's live lecture in Unit 3, we discussed the Polk model as forming the 4 main tasks of a manager leader, and the P in that Polk model stands for planning. So today we're going to focus on what does planning actually entail, and we're going to look at some of those subtasks with regards to planning. And if you do remember from last week's live lecture, there are 3 essential subtasks when it comes to planning. What I've done is, sorry, I know there's a whole lot of information on this particular slide, but just to make you understand that you cannot just go on what's in the PowerPoints with regards to your revision for the test. I've copied and pasted the learning content for Unit 4 from your study guide. So essentially, when you are revising, you need to be guided by the learning content for Unit 4. So in this lecture, we will be focusing on just some of this learning content. It does not mean then that the rest of the learning content from your study letter is not applicable. So this is the reason I actually have just put this on the slide to make you understand that when you are revising, in order to do justice to the particular unit, you need to be guided by the learning content that is in the study guide. Okay, so we start by looking at what is the reason that planning is so essential to any manager leader? And ask yourself, do you as a student currently plan with regards to the content you need to cover, the assessments that you need to do within a particular time frame, for example? So I think you need to understand that without planning, one cannot look into the future. So in a way, planning allows us to firstly decide where it is we want to go. And secondly, it allows us to come up with a way to get to where it is we want to go. So planning has to be, it cannot just be left to chance. It cannot just be incidental. It has to be a deliberate as well as an intellectual activity. So when you start teaching next year as well as an educator, you may not be part of the management team of the school, but as an educator, you have to be involved in your own planning, for example, for the term, as well as for the year. You have to know what content you need to cover for that particular grade that you may be teaching or for that particular class that you may be teaching. So planning is not just a task of a manager leader, it's a task of any educator within the school that may be involved in planning at their particular level within the education system. So very important for when a manager leader plans, they've got to look at what does the South African school education system say about what needs to be achieved with regards to education on the whole within the country. So when we consider planning and where it fits in to the entire education department, I think it's important to consider that, like Fundamenta states, a school never exists in isolation. So what does that mean? If you actually look at the upside down triangle or inverted triangle that is on the slide, you should understand that a school is affected by not just the internal environment of the school itself, it is also affected to a large degree by the external environment. And that external environment could be the community that surrounds the school. It is also the particular province in which that school is situated. And then finally, and very importantly, the external environment encompasses, for South Africa, the National Department of Basic Education, that we abbreviate DBE. So if you look at the inverted triangle, understand that this broader base of the triangle, which is now actually at the top because it is inverted, that is what we consider to be the macro environment of the triangle. So the National Department of Basic Education and the decisions that they make definitely have an impact on the meso environment, which is the school itself, that can be found at the apex or the tip of the triangle. You also have, as part of the external environment, you have the meso environment of the school. And this is made up of, in a South African context, the 9 provincial departments of education. So a principal or manager leader in the school, as well as the SMT, as well as the school governing body, has absolutely no control most of the time about the decisions that are made at the national macro level, as well as the provincial or meso level. However, those decisions definitely affects the internal environment of the school, and it affects the school and the decisions that the manager leader may make within the school. So take, for example, the whole COVID-19 pandemic that is currently problematic in a school setting in South Africa currently. The decision as to when schools closed, for example, the decision as to when schools were allowed to open, all of those decisions were made at a national level. And remember, the head of that national level is therefore the head of or the Minister of Basic Education, who's currently Angie Motshekga. So the decisions that are made by the head of the macro level or the national level, those decisions may get filtered down to a provincial level, and essentially those decisions affect what happens within a school. So a school has to plan with regards to the decisions that are made at the meso and the macro level, and they have absolutely no control over those decisions. So unfortunately, in South Africa, we did not plan for a pandemic that is going to prevent children from attending school. So there was no way that, for example, online learning could automatically happen when schools were closed. But as a result of this pandemic, at a national level, policies started being drafted. Decisions had to be made in order to solve that problem. And now we come to those 3 subtasks of planning, which is policy making, decision making in terms of problem solving. So that is a very good example the COVID-19 pandemic is a very good example that we can use to explain how schools, the specific school itself, is affected by the external factors and the external environment, even though they do not have control over those decisions, they have to plan accordingly and in keeping with the decisions made at a national level as well as a provincial level. So I would suggest that think about this current situation of the COVID-19 pandemic and the influence it has had with regards to the external environment of the school. So the next slide looks at the 2 components of planning. So once again, when we plan, we look at the future. So planning allows us to envision the future, to look to the future. So the starting point of planning needs to be that any school must draft certain aims that they would like to achieve in the future. And those aims could be based on what are the needs of the school itself as a whole, what are the needs of specific departments within that school. It could even consider what are the needs of specific subjects within that school. But a very important thing to consider is that there's one thing for manager leaders to sit down and formulate a whole range of aims. without action, the time spent on formulating those aims would actually be wasted. So the starting point for planning is definitely one of the things is that manager leaders have to sit down and decide what specific aims are there, and what specific aims does the school in a way want to achieve. But without people and groups of people putting those plans into action, the time spent on drafting of those aims would have been wasted. So it's very important to understand that, yes, one part of planning is looking and at considering future aims, but in order for those aims to be realized, for example, there must be a plan of action, and that plan of action must be put into place. Something has to be done in order for any organization and a school to realize those aims. So it's also important to understand that with regards to the planning process, schools must have a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach to when things go wrong. And the only way this can happen is if schools ensure that they have the necessary policies in place. So a school that does not, for example, have a drug policy in place, they won't have any document that could guide them on how to deal with, for example, a child that is caught in possession of a specific drug at a school. So that would now become reactive. They're reacting to a problem that has been presented. Whereas if they were proactive, they would have a drug policy in place. And when a problem presents itself, the policy will guide them as to how to proceed. Okay, so when we talk about planning and we're talking about looking to the future, envisioning the future, we must then ensure that at a school level, planning involves the school management team having a definite vision, a mission, aims, as well as outcomes. So here also, there are clear distinctions between each of these, but there are also the differences may be very subtle. So it's important to ensure that you understand what we mean by a vision as opposed to a mission, what we mean by aims as opposed to outcomes. And I think it's also important to note that whether we are looking at the vision of a school, the mission of a school, aims or outcomes, all of these are focused on planning for the future, and they all are focused on achieving specific results. So if we were to start with what is the vision for a school? So here we are looking at something that is absolutely broad and is also considered to be a very long-term strategy as to what the school wants to achieve. But this vision of the school has to be aligned to the vision of the education system as a whole. And I think at this point, it is therefore very important for us to understand what is the vision of the Department of Basic Education in this country. So their vision is for all people to have access to lifelong learning, to education and training, and this in turn is going to contribute towards improving the quality of life and building a peaceful, prosperous, and democratic South Africa. So when any school management team is coming up with their vision, the vision for specific schools has to be aligned to the vision of the Department of Basic Education. So when a school has drafted its vision, the mission statement that the school now actually drafts has to be informed by the vision. So yes, the vision is absolutely broad and very, very long term. The mission statement also might relate to long-term ideals, but there can be things that the school would like to achieve in a shorter period of, say, 1 to 3 years. And it is important that all relevant stakeholders at a school on a regular basis probably every 5 years, sit down and reevaluate their mission statement and consider should new things be added to their mission statement in keeping with a new vision for the school that they may have come up with. So it's very important to understand that yes, the mission statement is also long-term ideals, but it can be considered to be shorter term as opposed to the vision of the school, and a mission statement has to be informed and aligned with the vision. AIMS, on the other hand, focuses also on the long term, but is now shorter term when compared to the mission statement, and AIMS are more specific to a particular department, for example. Say, for example, the sports department, they now have a goal that they'd like to achieve in a month, in a term, in a year. That would now become or be considered an aim of the school. So the mission statement is generally in keeping with what the entire school would like to achieve, whereas aims are in keeping with what more specific departments wish to achieve in a shorter time period than is for the mission statement. And the last of these are the outcomes. So outcomes focus on very short-term results. When we compare outcomes in terms of duration to the mission statement and aims, outcomes now focus on something that the school or a specific department might want to achieve in 1 month, for example. And it's also very important to know that outcomes are derived from the aims. They have to be specific, but in keeping with the aims that a particular department may have come up with. So a specific school will develop a mission statement. And also, please know at this point that, or let me ask a question and see if people participate in this question. Whose responsibility is it ultimately to draw up the mission statement? So according to the South African Schools Act of 1996, who should be tasked with ensuring that a school has a mission statement? And in the absence of there being a mission statement for the school, the Department of Education, for example, who would they go to now ensure that there is and there does exist a mission statement for the school? Okay, if anyone knows an answer to that question, please feel free to type it in. And the question again is, whose responsibility, as per the South African Schools Act of 1996, whose responsibility is it to actually ensure that every school has a mission statement? So if you are sitting there not knowing whose responsibility it may be, ask yourself, does that responsibility of ensuring that a school has a mission statement, does it fall to just the principal? Is it the responsibility of the principal and maybe the school management team? Is it the responsibility of the school governing body? Should it be the responsibility of the parents? Or alternatively, should it be the responsibility of all the relevant stakeholders that I've actually just mentioned? Okay, unfortunately, no one is answering that question. So the answer to that question, as laid down in the South African Schools Act of 1996, the school governing body is tasked with ensuring that a school has a mission statement. And once again, it is the SGB's responsibility to do this, but it has to be based on the Departments of Basic Education's responsibility. Sorry, it has to be based on the vision as laid down by the Department of Basic Education. Okay, then we come to the planning process itself. There's a very nice diagram in Fundamenta that, sorry, if I just look for it, it's diagram 7.3 or figure 7.3 on page 135 that shows you the 4 steps of the planning process. Okay, so just to go back and look at why we need to plan. So planning is needed to decide in advance what you want to achieve and how you are going to achieve it. So the planning process should be centered around the school's vision and mission, as well as the principal's values. And all of these are important in allowing the principal to establish the context of the school, and he can therefore plan accordingly. So as part of the planning process, schools need to ensure that there's firstly a vision in place, a mission statement based on the vision, that specific departments within the school have aims and they derive outcomes in keeping with those aims. So step one of the planning process is what we call a needs analysis. Okay, this is where you figure out what you require in order to do your job. So as an educator, you're going to require certain resources to teach effectively. Doing a needs analysis allows you to know if you do not have sufficient resources so you can plan accordingly. So in a way, it helps us to determine the present situation, the current situation. It helps us to know where we are at the current time so that we can plan for the future if there is a need to do that. So then it says, and here as well, if you can participate in that question, what are the 6 management areas in the school? Because it's important that by a principal, by examining the 6 management areas, this allows him or her to find weaknesses so that they can develop specific aims accordingly. So if you want to contribute to the answer on this question, because it is part of Unit 3, and this is something that we looked at in the previous lecture, please type in your answer in the Q&A. So the question is, what are the 6 management areas in the school that a principal has to examine in order to find if there are weaknesses in any one of those areas? So from the last live lecture and as part of your preparation for your test in Unit 3, when we looked at the model that had the cults in the middle, it had the 4 management tasks in the next concentric circle, and then it went on to talk about the subtasks. The second to last concentric circle centered on the 6 management areas within the school. So those 6 management areas that any principal must examine to find out if there are weaknesses would be the learner affairs, staff affairs, administrative affairs. The 4th one would be physical facilities. Then it's financial affairs, as well as school community affairs. To answer the question, who should be included in the evaluation of the current school situation? If you had to think about that as a question and think about your answer to that question, I think you would come up with something that when a principal is looking at the present situation and coming up with a needs analysis, he or she should involve as many people as possible. So here we are talking about the staff, the school governing body, other parents, learners, and even interested groups from the community. Okay, so the next step of planning becomes to determine the future situation. So, sorry, just to go back to this step of planning. To give you an example, say for example, you are a foundation phase teacher and you are teaching the topic of dairy farming. And you now decide that in order to effectively teach this topic, it requires you to take your class or the entire grade to a dairy farm as part of an outdoor activity where they will better learn certain skills and certain concepts. So you now also realize that in order to take them to the dairy farm, you need transport to do that. So over and above all the other aspects of planning around an excursion or a field trip, one of the things that you focus on is that there are 60 learners that require to be transported to the dairy farm. And the school may have a minibus, to make it simple, one that can transport 20 learners. So when you are doing your needs analysis, you now realize that you need transport for an additional 40 learners. So that is why it's so important that we do a needs analysis. We determine the present situation. So your present situation for this excursion or field trip is that you need to transport 60 learners to the dairy farm. The school bus that the school currently owns can only seat 20 learners. So in a way, it's showing you that you need to hire more transport to transport the other 40 learners to the dairy farm. So that is just a practical example of the importance of a needs analysis, the importance of determining the present situation. Okay, so step 2 becomes determining the future situation. And once again here, all stakeholders, it should involve all stakeholders meeting, coming up with a mission, coming up with aims, as well as with outcomes. So the first question of a mission statement, who drafts that mission statement? So like I just said to you or asked you to come up with an answer, we just looked at the fact that the South African Schools Act 84 of 1996, it's actually section 20 specifically stipulates that the school governing body should develop the mission statement of the school. And this can be done in consultation with the SMT and other relevant stakeholders of the school. So what is a mission statement? A mission statement should include the values and the core beliefs of a school. And it should be aligned with the vision of the school, which should be aligned with the vision of the Department of Basic Education. The mission statement should also indicate what the SMT wants to achieve in the long term in keeping with the Department of Basic Education's vision. And why is it important when we draft a mission statement, or when the SMT, drafts a mission statement, they start to think about the future and where the school is heading. So in a way, it gives the SMT direction, but it's also a document that can be inspiring to learners. It can be something that they want to live up to. So there's lots of schools in South Africa, if they draft a new mission statement, they will make that mission statement, for example, part of every assembly. So that becomes something that the learners live by. So in a way, it's important as well that the mission statement is inspiring. There is a task on the slide. I strongly suggest that you do the task. It will help you as well for your next online test. So just take a few minutes to maybe look at the vision for the Department of Basic Education. Try and draw up a very broad, overarching vision for a particular school. Maybe use the school that you created for your assignment, the school that you were the headmaster of or principal of for your assignment. So maybe use that school as a particular scenario and come up with a vision for that school. And based on the vision that you come up with, create a mission statement. I know here the task is saying create a mission statement for an urban school that services a moderate income bracket community. But if you want to create a mission statement because it makes more sense for the school that you were the principal of in the assignment, you know more context about that school, then create a mission statement for that school. I think it's just important that you go through the task of actually creating a mission statement. It doesn't matter whether it's for the school that's on the slide or it is for the school that you created as part of your assignment. Okay, so when coming up with a mission statement, also bear in mind that broad general aims are formulated from that mission statement. So if there's a broad mission, for example, to create a culture of lifelong learning and teaching by means of effective education, then one of the school's aims or goals could be, for a particular year, we would like to achieve a 100% pass rate. So the mission statement is very important because it informs the more specific aims of the school that they would like to achieve for particular departments. So here the academic department may say that we would like to achieve a 100% pass rate if one of the aims, if one of the aspects of the mission statement are effective education, a culture of lifelong learning and teaching. So that's something also to bear in mind. Whatever's in the mission statement will then inform the specific aims that departments will come up with. So the next part of, still with step 2 of planning, sorry, we haven't left step 2 of planning, we're still with that, is to determine the future situation. So now you are formulating aims and outcomes. So once again, aims are long-term goals, but not as long-term as the mission statement. So compared to the mission statement, they're shorter-term goals, maybe achievable in a year. And it is something towards which all the stakeholders need to work towards. And it's also what needs to be achieved after an activity has been completed. It's usually formulated by the SMT, but it should involve consultation with the various stakeholders. So, for example, imagine if one of the aims of the academic department is 100% pass rate, but this has happened without consulting the educators, without buy-in from those educators, without them accepting the aims. It is not going to be achieved. So it's important to understand that aims may be formulated by the SMT, but must be in consultation with the necessary people who are going to be tasked with ensuring that the aims are achieved. Why is it an essential component in planning as well? When coming up with aims, this is what allows the school management team to measure progress. So if there aren't aims as part of a school's planning, the SMT has nothing against which they can actually measure progress. So from the aims, we then come up with even more specific and shorter term outcomes. And outcomes can be considered to be the building blocks of aims. And here it's very important to understand that when a school or the SMT is coming up with outcomes, there must be certain criteria that the school follows. So school outcomes, the criteria can be explained by the acronym SMART. So the S stands for the fact that those outcomes must be specific, meaning that they must be clear. If someone reads an outcome and asks, well, what does that mean? It means that the outcome is not clear. So a criteria is that the outcome must be specific, they must be clear, they must be concise. Measurable, that's the M. I think that's self-explanatory. The A for the outcomes is that they must be acceptable. So whose responsibility is it for reaching those outcomes? Those people have to identify with those outcomes. The R, the outcomes should be realistic. So they have to be achievable, and the T stands for trackable. They must be used to measure progress. They must be trackable so that the SMT can see how far they have come in achieving certain aims. Okay, so the next step of the planning process is step 3. This is where we determine a plan of action. So it comes after determining the future situation. It comes after the school has laid down a vision, a mission, and aims and outcomes have been made. So at this point, sorry, Warwick?
Manoli, the session is about to end. You've got literally 30 seconds left.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll just talk them through the last part of the slide. Sorry about that, students. I think I was waffling on a whole lot. So the next part of the slide will focus on step 3 and step 4. So what I will do is ensure that this PowerPoint is on ECI by the end of today. So please look at it, and then there'll be a second part to Unit 4, which focuses on problem solving and decision making. Please also look at the second PowerPoint for Unit 4, which will be in your second online test. Thanks so much, Warwick. Were there any questions?
No questions. I think everyone was understanding what you were having to say today.
Either that or they'd all fallen asleep.
All right. Thanks, Manoli.
So
I'll
much,
end it up here. No problems.
Okay, we'll see you next week.
Yep.
Cheers,
no, you'll see me later today.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I can't forget about that. I will see you later in the day. Okay, bye-bye to all the 4th years. Good luck with your revision. Bye-bye.